Well, hello there, everyone. It's the presentation that I thought was like never gonna happen, and we finally have figured out a way to make it happen. Although I'm fighting a number of minor technical difficulties in the process, but yeah, welcome to everybody. Oh, excuse me, Bonnie. It was IRBMs. You're right. But yeah, everyone is gonna have to kind of bear with me a little bit tonight. Um, I'm having to use a different program from what I'm normally used to stream tonight, and I don't like the layout of it at all. I really don't like the layout, but it's making it so that I can interact with chat a little bit easier too. So hopefully things aren't too terribly bad. Turn my mic down a little bit tonight. So gosh, when was the last spiritual connection stream? March? And a month later, and 4 delays later, here we finally are, and we're still battling computer problems and computer issues, because Dell doesn't know how to build a computer. But tonight we are going to talk a little bit. And I say a little bit because it really is small in the grand scheme of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the ATF program tonight. So, yeah, right. Yeah, that could be a whole new stream in of itself. And we'll probably complain about it later, but yeah, let's kind of dive into this. Chat is in follower only mode, and I will periodically check back into chat because I can actually see chat in this view, but I can't move the cycles on the actual presentation at the same time. Oh, you're going for 10. Oh, Pico's going for the big numbers. So, but everybody who's coming tonight, welcome, and everybody on the VOD, welcome. Glad to have you all with us. We are going to quickly here do a recap. And yes, I do actually have music on the background. It's because if I don't have music on the background, this mic headset actually will randomly shut off. So we're going to always have music in the background of these streams now. But we're going to do a quick kind of something to get you guys thinking on the right track here once again. So to remind you here, the reason that we're talking about familial systems, or that spiritual connection, as it were. You know what? I'm still going to bring up chat on my phone here real quick. Where is it? There it is. There we go. But the reason we call it a familial system is because it comes out of the same family. But there are two types of familial weapon systems, just to reorient you. There's the inherent familial. So it's technology that's procured over a series of time, and it can kind of extend its reach across multiple platforms. Characteristics come in a series of time-sensitive means. So over time, there's technology that's built upon the old technology, but it's still the same system, so it makes information incredibly sensitive. And those would be in examples like the Atomic Annie cannon, the XB-70 Valkyrie, which we're going to be talking about next week, and the SR-71 Blackbird family, which we have talked about in the past. Now, there's also the operative familial. So it uses the same technology across all platforms. Every single piece of technology that is available to all the platforms across all the branches. But it's really popular with people who are trying to save money and try and get materiel consolidation. We're actually going to be talking about that a little bit actually, not too terribly long from now, we're going to be talking about that a little bit in this presentation, because we're actually hearing that materiel consolidation punchline word is very popular right now, and it's coming back around. So it's something that we're going to see once again. And examples of those are like the F-35 Lightning IIs, the F-4 Phantom, and all the way back to the Cat family of aircraft, which reaches all the way back into the late 1930s, 1940s, all the way up through present. So familial isn't new. The concept of a familial aircraft or weapon system, and it's not just limited to aircraft. It's all over the place, but the concept is not new by any means. So it's important for you to remember kind of where we are in our timeline here. Um, so we have, of course, the characters that we all know and love here. So the B-2 we talked about last time. We also talked about the N-1M, the YB-35, and the YB-49 last time. Next time, we're going to be talking a little bit about the B-21 and Bomber Futures Forward. That one's going to be a little bit interesting just because there's not a lot of information out there on it. But we'll be talking about that next time. But today we're going to be largely talking about that YF-23 in the ATF program. So if you haven't watched the last stream, and I know it's very difficult if you're somebody that's new to these streams, because I know there were a couple of people that were looking at wanting to be at this stream, but they maybe didn't watch part 1. You'll actually really want to watch part 1, because part 1 at least gets you to about 1955. And that's really where you want to be. Actually, you could probably take it all the way up through the 80s, but you really want to get up through 1955 with Jack Northrup's flying wing designs for you to really understand where some things in this presentation are coming from this evening. Again, another recap, and again, I'm doing most of this because it's still relevant and important. We actually are going to look at ATB, and the reason that we're going to take a look at ATB really quick is because ATB is kind of where we see the beginning of modern design. Well, it's not really where we see the beginning of modern design. We see that in the fighter family, but we see some of it in this particular project in the ATB program, the bomber program. And it was colloquially known as Aurora before it becomes known as Spirit. But Aurora comes from a code name that was given to the entire ATB program. It was largely focused with between Lockheed and Northrop. And Northrop is the one that's going to walk out of there with a win. They're eventually going to go on and create the B-2 stealth bomber, the Spirit, as it's called. And that's going to enter production in 1988. They're going to have one that's actually functional and flying a little bit before then. But 88 is going to be the date that they're going to have their test flights sent out. And Lockheed is going to walk away with this with an L. Now, what's important to remember, the senior peg was basically a giant F-117. And we're going to bring up the F-117 here a little bit later. But it's important to note that in 1981, they had basically come up with the concept and design for the F-117, and the F-117 is actually airborne and flying by 1981. So they had already come away with a win. They had experience with stealth technology and design up to that point with the SR-71 Blackbird. So this was a very big deal for Lockheed to actually come away with this loss. But I want you all to keep in mind that this particular program, the ATB program, was between Northrop and Lockheed, just like the ATF program is later on here. And so when we look back and we think about this, I'm going to go ahead and close this, otherwise my battery's going to die. When we look back and frame this here, what we need to remember is that all things generally have a lead up of about 20 to 30 years, and really it goes on a lot longer than that, but I'm going to call it 20 to 30 years. We're going to start back in the 1920s, or 1920s. We're going to start back in, yeah, that would be really far back. It actually does start in the 1920s, but we're going to not start that far back. We're going to start in the late 1950s, 1960s. So there is a demand for consolidation for a familial air platform. So you'll remember earlier, consolidation of materiel across multiple platforms. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara wants the armed forces to consolidate their aircraft. At this time, there's aircraft out there flying around that, for all intents and purposes, are well, this isn't a big deal anymore, but it used to be. So there were aircraft flying around in 1959, 1960, 61 that are some 20, 25, 30 years old, and that was seen as absolutely ridiculous, especially in a time of an arms race where technology is bounding and leaping across multiple, tiers of generations. And so McNamara was trying to figure out exactly why we would have older technologies out there on the field. So he's ordering a consolidation. And one of the other things that he wants to do is he wants to make it so that we have this is a concept that's come up a lot actually in modern military, but you want to have a lean fighting force, a lean and ready fighting force that isn't bogged down by all this extra weight. And that's basically what he's looking to do here. Problem is that McNamara is not a military man. He is not also necessarily a friend of any of the branches. McNamara is very much a pacifist as well. He's seeking a diplomatic route, which is good, but when you consider the time where we're ramping up into Vietnam, the space race is on, the Soviets are going at an incredible pace. McNamara was the right person in the wrong time for DoD. So he's kind of in this unique spot, and he catches a lot of flack for it, rightly so. But in addition to that, you have General Curtis LeMay, who wants bombers, just bombers. He doesn't want, fighters. He doesn't want recon. If you can't put bombs on it, he really doesn't give any. He doesn't care. He does not want it. He wants something that makes big mushroom clouds and big booms and things like that. And if it doesn't do that, then he doesn't want it. So that's why you get aircraft like the F-106 that's capable of actually carrying out an interceptor role with atomic nuclear-tipped air-to-air missiles. However, at this time, we have the Century series of aircraft, so we're in the mid to late 1960s. And so we have this Century series of aircraft, so we have the 100, the 101, 102, 104, 105, and 106. And but in addition to that, we also had things like the B-58 was out and flying around. You'll start seeing whispers of the F-111. And there's all these aircraft. The A4s are out there. There's the A5 Vigilante. The A6s are coming online. The A7s are coming online. You'll see F8s start to show up, and you have all these different aircraft that are starting to permeate all over the place. And there's just no organization to it at all. Of all these different aircraft, and some of them overlap missions. Well, we don't need this, is kind of what McNamara was getting at. So what ends up happening is the two kind of get into a race of what they can chop. McNamara is going to chop the B-58 and the XB-70. LeMay, followed by McNamara, is going to chop the Blackbird. And eventually what we will have is an emphasis on the A4 Skyhawks and Seahawks, and the F4 Phantoms will be the primary focus of air power for about 10 or 15 years. So probably, right in that 1955 through 1967 era is when we're really looking at the A4s and the F4s. Now, in the midst of this, we're also looking for lightweight fighters to take care of air superiority and air interception. We think that we can get things by with the FX program that Northrop is working on. I think they were countering Boeing, and Boeing just could not pull up the means to do it while also dealing with the B-52. Northrop's proposal will get selected. We'll get the F-5 and the T-38 out of that program. But the U.S. Navy's needs weren't fulfilled with that, and here we see that break again, where there's a problem with these aircraft just not meeting the need across the board. And what ends up happening is the U.S. Navy is going to go and they're going to launch their own research and development program called VFX, and later on that's going to produce the F-14 Tomcat. It's absolutely ridiculous how some of this shit works. So the Air Force then decides, well, we need a high-speed interceptor. Well, we could cannibalize the F-5 and come up with some other great idea for a lightweight interceptor that'll actually take care of what we need. But ultimately, they are going to opt for what looks like a fixed-wing F-14 in 1969 that will eventually be redesigned into what we more modernly know as the F-15 later on. And so here we do have the F-15, and we also have the F-117. Now, the reason that both of these are in here is because they are a very pivotal footprint in this. So you have the F-117, which enters the scene, like I said, in about 1981. Stealth had been a concept for over 20 years, so we talked in the Blackbird presentation about the A-12 Oxcart and the Archangel program. As some of you may remember, A-12 literally stood for Archangel 12, but none of those were ever official designations. I think they want to say that A-12 is, but it really wasn't, and Oxcart really wasn't an official designation either. It was just kind of out there. And if you actually look at how all the designations work, A-12 does not work for the mission of the aircraft. But eventually we'll get the SR-71, both of those aircraft applying stealth technologies. So stealth had been around for, like I said, just over 20 years by the time the F-117 comes on. It serves in an attacker strategic strike role, which is a role generally that the F-4 was kinda sorta doing. The big thing that you have to remember with the F-117 is its mission was very niche. So you had the F-4s, which were coming in and dropping napalm all over the place. Big booms. LeMay liked it. Big booms, right? Well, by the time we get the F-117, LeMay is not around anymore. But the big focus and mission of the F-117 was to hit hard targets. What do I mean by hard targets? ICBM casings, for example. So they are designed to punch through concrete. So this is where you get the popular concept of bunker busters. It comes from like the F-117 weapons payloads, the GBP sets. So that was the main mission of the F-117. However, F-117 has no air combat capabilities. It does not have a gun. It could be equipped with missiles. But it was not designed to be highly maneuverable. It was very easy if you got into an air engagement with an F-117 that the F-117 is going to have to like rely on shutting up in order to stay alive, pretty much. But it did introduce a smaller footprint and more agile application for stealth technology. So it was more maneuverable than the SR-71, the A-12 was, by all means. It was also much smaller, so it opened the door, really, for potential in reducing radar cross-section in smaller aircraft. But it also aged stupidly fast, which is why about 20 years later you see the F-117 kind of going by the wayside, much to some people's dismay. So we don't see a need really for the F-117. Even as early as 1998, when the Serbs will actually shoot down an F-117. There's no urgency in recovering the aircraft. There's no concern, really, when that aircraft goes down, because by then the Air Force has already decided that that technology is old and obsolete. All the air missions that were being taken up at the time were taken by the F-14, the F-15, and the F-16, which we know as the Teen series. The F-15 was the craft that was designed to meet the need that was presented by the Soviets to counter their MiG-25s. The MiG-25 was an absolutely ridiculous aircraft at the time. Published, it was a Mach 2.5 aircraft. There are unofficial reports that it was able to make it up to Mach 3. So the need for something to counter this was absolutely immense. Meanwhile, the F-16 countered the MiG-29 and quick response air support, and the F-14 covered down the needs for the U.S. Navy. So it was matching a payload requirement that the U.S. Navy needed to cover down on its A6s, F4s, and A4s at the time. And there was a transition also that was happening at the time to convert the F4s over into the Air Force, and then all the F4s were going to be retired out of the Air Force. So there was a big transition that was happening at this time. Late 1970s, which is where most of our modern air power comes out of. But the F-15 was marketed as a key replacement for air superiority and that entire mission, which was designed to replace the F-4 in almost all of the Century Series aircraft, except the F-117, until about 1992. By the time 1992 comes around, we see the advent of the Strike Eagle, the F-15E, which effectively ends the F-117's mission. And that's really one of the reasons why there was no urgency during that 1998 skirmish in Serbia. It had to do with the Strike Eagle. So, moving on, what do we have in Mother Russia? Well, in Mother Russia, we have this interesting hodgepodge of aircraft, this mess. And it never ceases to amaze me how the Soviets and the Russians are capable of rebuilding an aircraft top to bottom, making it look exactly the same, function exactly the same, have the same innards, but call it a new aircraft. So there was a bomber scare that was going around at the time, and it's something that hasn't really gone away. It's something that still happens very much to this day, although it's just less likely that anything is going to come about it this day and age. And that bomber scare basically said that we've got Tu-95s and Tu-22s that are breaching North American airspace all the time. And we don't know if any of those have nuclear armaments on them, so we need something that will be able to counter them. Well, you also need something that's going to break through any air defenses that they bring along with them, air superiority, escorts, things like that. And what the Soviets have at the time is they have the MiG-25, which is the one that's pictured up there in the upper right-hand corner. It eventually is going to get developed into the MiG-31. Again, it looks exactly the same, but they call it an upgrade. That's the one that's right next to it there. Both of these have absolutely massive engines in them. And basically all it is brute force to get the desired speed, really, that they're looking for. So they're using brute force in order to get the speed that they want. The Americans aren't going to do that. We're looking a little bit more at efficiency. Keywords saying we're at least looking a little bit more at efficiency. But the MiG-25 and the subsequent MiG-31, those were basically designed to counter the Century aircraft and then later the F-15 with the MiG-31. Now, it is worth saying that when the 25 rolls out, it is a redesign of Soviet air power. So up to this point, we have seen things like the MiG-19, which imaged the F-86 Sabre, and we saw the MiG-21, which is what to me is the stupidest looking aircraft I think that's ever been considered viable. Um, a lot, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of countries and nations that still use the MiG-21, or I think they call it the J-10, is the Chinese version. But it's a really ugly looking thing, and it's tiny. Um, that's eventually what the MiG-29 is going to replace. But there's plenty of um, nations that would still use the 21. But it was a total redesign, pretty much, for the Soviets at the time. And a lot of their aircraft that they're going to design, Mikoyan and Sukhoi both, are going to copy off of this very successful platform when they see that the Americans are also going in a similar direction with the F-15. So eventually, you'll get the MiG-29s in 1977. The Sukhoi 27s are going to come on the scene in 1985. The 27 is eventually going to get modified into things like the Sukhoi 30, which is some other dumb variant. There's also the Sukhoi 33, which is their carrier-borne one, and the Sukhoi 35, which is basically, I guess the closest thing I could relate it to is kind of like what the Air Force is doing with the F-15 now. Whether or not it's actually that decent of a concept, I couldn't tell you for sure, but that's the general gist. MiG-29 is going to get modified into the 33, MiG-33, which is the current one, and the MiG-29KM. There's exports for both of those aircraft all over the damn place. So actually, I think that's a Bulgarian Air Force group there with the MiG-29s that you see. But the Soviet matching of the F-15 was huge concern for the Air Force. But there was a momentary pause, and it was a glimpse of majestic... It was a moment and a blip of majestic intelligence where they stopped and they thought, wait, let's think of something else besides just outrunning this issue. We can do better. Let's think outside the box to fix this problem. And indeed, they are going to think outside of the box to fix this problem. And that is where the ATF shows up. And these are what are called requests for information. So it's very typical when you go through a typical air design platform phase. You will have a request for information followed by an actual competition, which is exactly what the Air Force is going to do here. So we have an idea. We need a high-speed solution, but let's not put all of our eggs in that basket. Let's take a look at something else. Well, what else can we look at? Well, we have that F-117, right? So we have stealth technology on the table. We have efficient engines in the F-15 that are serving us well. How can we put these two things together? And that's where you have the Advanced Tactical Fighter Program. So, I know it says 6 contractors up there. There were actually 7 contractors, although General Dynamics wasn't really considered because they were only submitting for air-to-ground. But these were designed to replace the F-15 initially. Much like we saw the F-35 having the intention of replacing the A-10, which never happened and it will never happen because that's stupid. You shouldn't do that. But this is a similar concept that we've got here. So there were 2 proposed requirements, Mach 3 up and or a stealth concept. By the time we get to 1983, they pull that back. They want Mach 2, and they want a stealth aircraft, and it has to meet both. It has to meet both of those requirements. So there were 19 designs from 7 different contractors. Now Boeing's air-to-air concept, that's first one that's over here, it's the TOG-W one, 52,000 pounds. That one is largely based off of the Sukhoi platform. So the Americans were kind of doing this thing where they're just like, hey, you're copying off of my homework, so I'm going to copy off of yours. Which doesn't get anybody anywhere when you think about it. When you're copying from the C student and you're a B student, it doesn't really work out well for you. Grumman's air-to-air concept borrowed from the FX, and eventually that is going to get passed down to the X-29 program. So this is kind of the spring point that they're using for the X-29 program is going to come out of this. Lockheed's submission, and we're going to talk about this here in just a second because it's the most radical change in the whole program, is based on the Blackbird. It doesn't look at all like the F-22 Raptor. So those of you who are familiar with the ATF program thinking that it was always just between the F-22 and the YF-23, that's not correct. Originally, initially the Lockheed concept looked like the Blackbird. It used the same J-58 engines too, is what the concept would have had. General Dynamics submits a 2-engined F-16. That is later purchased by Japan. Japan will actually take that, build that, and then they are using it for a number of years. Then they'll jump over to the F2, which they're currently using. Kiffer will also purchase that design as well. McDonnell's air-to-surface, actually, and I noticed this as I was building this presentation. I never really looked at it closely before. But it looked like what the public believed the Aurora project to look like. Except they had 2 engines at the rear instead of 4 engines underneath. And I always thought that was very interesting. I wanted to throw that in here. The Missileer and the Agile did not undergo much transformation. So when we get to actually looking at that aircraft, you'll see that they actually didn't undergo much in the way of transformation. Boeing's blended wings proposals, so the second design here and their surface or air-to-surface concept, those will go to the X-31 program, which is headed by Rockwell, and then Rockwell is actually going to be involved in helping out the Eurofighter Corporation in building the Typhoon. So it'd be incorrect to say that there would be no Typhoon without ATF. However, RDE concepts and RFI concepts out of ATF helped with the Typhoon program down the road. So it's very interesting to kind of see exactly everything that came out of this when you're getting way down to it. And yeah, Lockheed was interesting here. That was a very interesting concept that they went with to have another Blackbird. They really didn't want to let the Blackbird go, and I can't say that I blame them, but I just don't see how it would have worked for the mission that they were trying to accomplish here. So let's start with Lockheed here. And it was what they'll eventually call it is Senior Sky, is what it's going to be known as. Senior Sky here is that which would become the bird of prey, not to be confused with the X-39. But the original concept, like I said, looked like a modernized Blackbird, same J-59 engines, with a goal of Mach 3+. They were doing something that was ambitious. They were kind of copying off of North American's homework with the Rapier program. The problem is that it didn't meet the criteria that was refined by the Air Force later. So ultimately what will happen is they'll scrap it. They will take the concepts out of the F-117 and the Blackbird, and they will try and merge it into a design that works. And by 1985, they are going to come up with a concept that they are confident that they can build and will meet the need. And that concept is actually the third drawing there, and we'll see it here in a little bit, which is the YF-22. The proof of concept was half the size and a quarter of the weight. So it was cut way back. But one of the other reasons that they had to do the redesign was because General Electric and Pratt & Whitney at the time were both selected for a contract for Series 119 and Series 120 engines, and they were required to include those engines in any prototype that they scaled up. So when Lockheed and Northrop are selected, they have to use those engines. They have to build 2 prototypes. One of them has to use the G&E. The other one has to use the P&W. That was the requirement. The speed adjustments were to have the aircraft fly around Mach 2. An interesting thing about any of the ATF program is that the speed is never confirmed. So we have approximations for speed, but we don't know what the actual speed was. So just assume anytime that you see speed referenced in any ATF documentation, that speed is probably wrong. It's probably conservative, it's probably on the low side, and it's probably for good reason. Now, we have here the Northrop concept, which is where things get tied in here with our previous talk. This is where things kind of start coming together for the Aurora/Spirit family. So you have Northrop's design here, which uses a blended design between both of their second-tier prototypes, so Design 2 and Design 3. Design 2 was the Missileer. Design 3 was Agile. And what's interesting about Agile is they actually did a full-blown schematic draw-up of Agile, which is the third schematic set that you see there. It changed the least through the RFI and RDO process. So from start to finish, Northrop's design doesn't do anything, pretty much. It changes very, very little in the way of design, in the way of functionality, in the way of, hey, you requested this information and you liked it, so we are going to bring it to finish. So Northrop stays a little bit more true to their word. Neither concept was built as design, but that's typical, especially as things go down the way. You know, you get to 1985 and things like that, where you have adjustments in how the engines are supposed to perform, what the requirements actually are. These are the standards that you have to meet. And by 1985, that was done, and they had a design concept for the production of the YF-23 prototypes. But it also retained the lightweight as outlined by the RFI. If I remember right, I think the YF-23 weighed between 28 and 31,000 pounds empty, which is exactly what they had spec'd in the RFI. So the requirement for ATF had them have to move Agile's weapons system internally, which is why they also borrowed out of the Missileer concept, because if you had external payloads, that is additional surface that can be used in an RCS for a radar cross-section. It increases the size of your radar cross-section and therefore your risk of detection and the confidence in detection. So the new requirement was to have an internal weapons payload. Now, as we'll see later, though, that does not remove external pylons from being an option, but it requires the aircraft to function with an internal weapons payload and be able to be as lethal as with the pylons on the external payload. So this is a copy out from the previous presentation as well. So there were trickle-down innovations that come down through in the F-23 program, and I didn't include this picture in here. I should have. There's a really great picture of a B-2 that is landing behind an F-23, and it's really kind of striking to see. But there are nuances that are included in the YF-23 program that they have included in the B-2. We'll talk about those here in a little bit. Um, but it used similar control features. And Northrop did continue to pitch the idea to the ATA, which was the Navy's program that they were running counter to the ATF program. They wanted something for carrier-borne operations that would replace the F-14. I believe at the time it would have been the F-14B and C models, but they also wanted to replace the F-18 A's and B's and the C at the time. So they were focusing on something there. Northrop is going to pitch again, but Northrop's pitch was dropped each time in favor for others, unfortunately. But Northrop does end up using the Spirit and parts of the YF-23 in the B-21 program, and we'll talk about what's used in the B-21 program on the next presentation, but that's not what we're going to get into here for the rest of the night. So the flight tests, as we have here. So between 1989 and 1992 is when most of these flight tests are conducted. The YF-23 was sleek and slender. The published airspeed was 1,450 miles per hour. That was the published airspeed. However, one of the pilots that has flown the YF-23 said that they did have higher airspeeds that were actually recorded. There were also some instrument readouts that did get leaked once upon a time that said that they had an airspeed clock at about 16. So it's likely that they're higher. But again, this is true of both ATF aircraft and both JSF aircraft. This is just something that does not really get published all that much. So it's very common to see discrepancies here. There were 4 internal hardpoints, had lower profile hardpoints, surface features, and engine troughs that were longer, but it also resulted in a significantly reduced RCS and a reduced heat signature. So those extended troughs that you see on the back of the YF-23 there, same ones that the B-2 use, those help with reducing the heat signature that the aircraft gives off, and it also helps cut down on sound of the engines. So we hear a lot about the screech and the scream and the whine of some of the aircraft that we hear flying overhead. It's much quieter in aircraft that have these much more defeating and longer engine troughs, such as the B-2 and the YF-23. Not so much with the F-22. The F-22 does not really have the engine troughs. Instead, it has thrust nozzling on the end, which you can't necessarily have with an engine trough. You can have it, but it's a little bit more difficult to successfully execute. And we only are just recently understanding how to execute thrust vectoring with an engine trough. So that's a very new technology within the last 10, 15 years. Definitely postdates the YF-23. But there were 2 ships that were produced. So there was Black Widow, which is the aircraft that you can see at the top in the upper left picture. And then there was Grey Ghost, which is the bottom one. It's also the one that's in the lower right picture that's flying with the YF-22. That YF-22 is also PAV-1. So if you were wondering about the individual CAT numbers and serial numbers and flight IDs, bottom F-22 is PAV-1. But the interesting thing of how they produced it was that they cannibalized aircraft to actually produce the prototype YF-23. So they used parts from the F-15, the F-18, and the B-2. So they pulled parts off the line from the B-2, and they actually took apart F-15s and F-18s to make the surface features on the YF-23. And McDonnell Douglas actually provided additional aid and RDE on the program. It's just like with Lockheed with the YF-22. I think it was Boeing. Boeing and General Dynamics worked with Lockheed on building that aircraft. So it was not just a Northrop project or just a Lockheed project. It was a culmination of different defense contractors that were involved. The engine troughs and the blended wing concept borrowed from Northrup's legacy designs. So when we're reaching back in time and we're looking at things that Jack Northrop was putting out there, he had these concepts laid out at the time with the blended wing designs and the flying wing designs, as we saw in the last presentation. So these are standard. This is typical Northrop design, typical Northrop innovation that is just getting carried over into a smaller form factor with a fighter. And as much as some people hate to hear it, I put it in here just to trigger some people. Lightweight and agile, it is true, the YF-23 could and did outmaneuver the YF-22. It was much smaller, it was much faster. It was capable of doing things that the F-22 could not do because of its design and because of its weight. That being said, the YF-22 was stable, much more stable, especially with thrust vectoring. It made it a lot more stable. And that is ultimately what made it a better aircraft for piloting, I guess you could say. We talk a lot in aircraft design and aviation design about one of the things that you want to do is you want to have the most unstable aircraft and have engines, surface features, and computers making it stable. You're trying to force an unstable aircraft to be stable, is what you're doing. Exactly. Yeah, just like Ness says. Instability is almost a good thing now with everything being fly-by-wire, which is interesting. Yes, that is exactly what we look for now, is we're looking for instability. So, Lockheed's entry was, of course, the Senior Sky. But it also saw more demonstration hiccups. So PAV-2 actually will crash in 1992. They salvage it to the point that it was able to be put on display. But neither PAV aircraft demonstrated practical characteristics that outpaced or outmatched the YF-23. Had a larger radar cross-section, had a little bit lower speed, was heavier, had more parts, but again, there were bits and pieces that the Air Force liked. So what were those things? The greater internal weapons storage capacity was the big one. So it had double the internal capacity of the YF-23. It had thrust vectoring engines, which allowed for better stability and control. So there's that point again, stability. Super Cruise was another thing that I was able to do. So I was able to maintain an elevated point of speed with relative ease without having to put too much strain on the engines, without having to go full AB. It was things like that that made it somewhat more efficient and somewhat more practical for what the Air Force was looking for at the time. Lockheed subsequently gets selected as the winner of the ATF program, and Boeing and General Dynamics will actually work with Lockheed on the production of the production variant of the F-22. As well as the prototype YF-22. By the time we get to 1996, General Dynamics walks it off. They're working on F-16 Block 60. So Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, and Lockheed Martin are going to be the main focuses for the F-22 program beyond that. And you can actually see it a little bit here too. If you look in the top picture, that's actually Spirit of America there, the first production F-22. Versus the YF-22 prototype on the bottom. They did not look the same. That's another thing that got brought up too, is that when you take something out of prototype and put it into production, it doesn't always look the same because they are taking research and development data off of the prototype and incorporating it into their production aircraft. So it's very common. And we'll take a look at that here in just a second. Actually, no, we're going to take a look at that right now. So the F-22 is going to enter production by 1996. As I mentioned, the first one was Spirit of America. It made its maiden flight in 97 after vigorous quality assurance and control checks, which is why we don't see introduction really until about 2000 when it's fully introduced. So even when that first production aircraft has rolled off the line, it is still an aircraft that has to go through base level testing. You can't just have this thing roll off because they have changed just enough that you have to have some kind of additional RDE that goes into it. So it briefly is called the FA-22. And I wanted to put this in here because I've had some people ask me about it before. So the reason that FA-22 was ever used is because they did want to emphasize that you could have things like JDAMs and ground-penetrating bombs and things like that. They wanted to emphasize that. They also wanted to counter the U.S. Navy's F-18. But it was dropped relatively fast. I think the FA-22 nomenclature shows up in like 2001 or 2002, and then like in 2005 it's gone. So it existed, but it was the same aircraft. I don't want people to get confused. So the F-22, it was heavier, it had a larger wing area. The slope on the wings was actually greatly reduced. It was also more rounded. It was kind of like, I think of the F-22, let's see, how do I put this? The YF-22 is the F-22 during the college football days, right? You know, it's lean, it's mean, you know, it's running. And the F-22 is at the end of an NFL quarterback's career. Still in good shape, but maybe a little bit more chunky. That's kind of how I look at it. So production will carry through about 2011 before it's subsequently canceled, and everything is destroyed. Everything. Well, what do you mean everything? All the tools that were used to create the aircraft, production plants, everything like that, all of them were destroyed. And then, on top of that, you have the JSF program that's going to roll along. And by the time that comes along, it's just not seen as feasible or cost-effective to restart the F-22 production line to actually fill in JSF. Which, ask me about that sometime off-stream, because I have opinions on that, and I don't mind whoever wants to hear them. I am actually very, very, very agitated about that because that was a mistake. But anyway, that's another presentation. So what has the F-22 done? Well, really and truly, not that much. It's fulfilled its mission, its primary mission, which, as we mentioned, was air superiority, interception, home defense, and things like that. It has done that in spades, and we have an incredible track record with it. But as for the other missions that we tacked on later, not a whole hell of a lot. So most of the F-22 deployments have been to Asia. The rest of them mostly have been in North America, so they're functioning with NORAD and things like that, filling things in. The first overseas deployment of the F-22 doesn't happen until 2007, and SecDef Gates was very adamant about not wanting to send them to SWA, Southwest Asia. But eventually they do have to make their way over there to provide air support for bombers in the area, things like that, especially when Iran starts saber rattling. They will send F-22s over for that. But the primary mission for the F-22, like I said, was interception and command and control. The first combat sortie doesn't happen until 2014 in Strikes Against ISIS, where it does drop. They are equipped with 1,000-pound bombs, and they are sent over, and they will carry out airstrikes with B-52s and B-1s. However, the C-2 missions remain the primary function of the F-22 at home and abroad, so things like NORAD, things like home defense, we see them almost daily where they're intercepting Tu-95s, Soviet bombers. That's a common thing that we see almost all the time. It not doing a whole lot can be seen as a good thing, though, I guess. Yes. You are... That is a correct assumption. That's the right way to look at it. But generally, F-22 is not an aircraft that really does all that much. It's more of a deterrent thing than anything in my book. But what I want to point out here too is you'll notice that it is carrying external fuel payloads. There are also a few pictures of it with external missiles. So you can equip pylons on the outside and you can carry them. It's just not recommended, especially if you need to keep a low profile. Most interceptions happen successfully because the encroaching aircraft or bandit or bogey does not actually see the aircraft coming. And so that generally works in our favor. So generally when you have a C2 mission or an intercept mission, you don't want those external fuel pods on board. So we generally don't see them. These F-22s, by the way, they are arriving. They are arriving over in, one of them is arriving in Kuwait, and the other one, I believe, is arriving at an airbase in, what is it? I can't remember if it's a base that's arriving in Turkey or if it's another adjacent airfield, but one of these is definitely Kuwait. So now let's talk a little bit about where the YF-23 goes. So it sees a few opportunities to be revived between 1991 and 2011. One of them was to replace the F-14, as I said, in the ATA program, but the Navy is going to instead do a stopgap measure. They'll buy the F-14D Super Tomcat, and then they'll replace that with the FA-18Es and Fs, the Super Hornets, which I still don't understand. That seemed like a ridiculous waste of money, especially for the whole, 12 years that the Super Tomcats were in service, but it's the Navy. What can I say? With the advent of the F-35, any hope of the YF-23, or the F-23 as it would be called, is gone from the Navy. It's not going to ever show up there. There was also a worry about a bomber gap, a big bomber gap scare in 1999 that launches the 2037 bomber program, but it eventually gets trimmed down into what we now know as the B-21 Raider, which Northrop has already won. They are currently working on a prototype B-21 that will eventually go into production. That contract has already been selected and seated. Now, the B-21 will fill a hole by the lack of production in B-2s. And this is not, this is my analysis. I want to put this in an asterisk somewhere. It's my analysis. In my mind, the B-21 fills a hole by lack of productions in B-2s and aids in the replacement of the B-52. As much as everybody loves the B-52, it can't stay around forever. It's going to have to go eventually. I mean, the aircraft is going to be what it first flew in 1951. How long do you want it to fly? That's a big ship. It's going to have to go eventually. So that is going to be the primary thing that the B-21 is going to be dealing with. But it's not going to replace the B1s or the B2s. I don't see that in the long term because I don't see that the size is conducive for filling the holes. So there probably is going to be a need for something out in that 2037, 2045 range. And we might see the resurgence of the 2037 bomber at some point. That proposal for the B-3, as everybody was talking about for the longest time in there too, which is ridiculous, being on conspiracy theory websites and reading that ridiculous trope. But the 2037 bomber program was canceled, but a bomber, like I said, is going to be needed to replace formally the B-2s and the B-1s. But there are no known schematics or drawings for that 2037 bomber. There is an artistic rendering that somebody who is not at all affiliated with the Air Force drew up, which is the one that's in the lower right-hand corner there. But we don't know for sure that it would look like that. But we also know that we could see Northrop's design coming back up again just because Northrop has a history of taking designs that they've had for the longest time and being able to sell them into something that actually is cutting edge and is advanced. There are some interesting developments that have happened alongside of the ATF program, however. So the first one was Half Dash. Half Dash was a contemporary program that was running with the ATF program. And it was proposed to be equipped on the ATF and the F-15. And what this basically was a stealth missile, a stealth air-to-air missile. As the ATF program is eating up money, there's need for renovations in the Navy. All this other stuff is going on, and there's a big consolidation. Not only that, but they were trying to resurrect the Blackbird around the time. That concept goes away quickly, as well as like the fall of the Soviet Union. But who counts as things like that? So Have Dash is going to go away relatively fast. By about 1992, we're going to see the last document on Have Dash. But the focus shifts then to high-speed and long-range missiles, so OTA missiles, or OTH missiles, excuse me. So over the horizon is what we're going to be looking at. And Lockheed is working on that project right now with the AIM-260, which is slated to be equipped on F-22s and F-35s out in the future. And basically, it's a missile, a projectile that's capable of flying in excess of Mach 5, and it's capable of traveling over the horizon to hit a target over the horizon. Now, in addition to that, we have the Navy is making noise again because they're not satisfied with the F-35, and who could blame them? But they are currently fielding the FAX program. And the FAX program is the thought process here is that they want a multi-role fighter in the 2030 range. They want an aircraft that is both capable of being piloted and unpiloted. The Air Force has shown interest in an idea where they would have swarm techniques. So you would have a piloted aircraft with 1, 2, 3, or more unpiloted UAVs that are in tow, perhaps a whole squadron. So there are some of these concepts that are starting to filter their way out into DoD, and the concepts range from the blended wings to blended tailless designs, kind of like the Boeing design that is kind of drawn up down there in the lower right. They're all conceptual right now. There's testing that's happening with slave systems, with swarm techniques, things like that, but these are all experiments, and it's not known if anything is going to happen in that 2030 range. Yeah, nice, Bonnie. But that is the general gist of the direction that things are going. But again, what we're also hearing right now is that there is a major push to consolidate aircraft again. And if things happen exactly how they have happened in history, we might see that consolidation with the F-35. We're going to see a blunder, and we're going to see a fallout, and we're going to start seeing all these very strange and new things start to sprout up. So it would not surprise me if we see this swarm concept kind of pop up in the 2035, 2040 time span out there in the future. With that, folks, before I hand off for questions, I just want to remind you all there is not a Final Fantasy VII stream tonight. No, I want to remind you all that the next stream will air on 7 June at 1800. That is a Monday, not a Friday. We're going to be talking about the XB-70 Valkyrie. Specifically, we're going to be talking about it on Monday because it is the 55th anniversary of the crash of the XB-70 Valkyrie, 7 June 1966. They lost one of the ships. So I moved it to that date, also because I had family coming in. But that'll be the next history stream. That's the Monday after next. And then the next Spiritual Connection stream is going to be on 9 July, and we're going to be talking about the B-21 program and the B-21 Raider. So that's another thing that I'm looking forward to. two new historic affairs streams announced. So we have 16 July is going to be the reading list, 3 September is going to be categorizing your field, and then the history stream for September is to be decided, but that'll be on 17 September. No history streams in August, at least not scheduled. They'll be impromptu, if anything. But I'm kind of taking a break there. So let me see here. Problem at the moment is humans can't do what the planes can do now. So I doubt we'll see anything radical without taking the human out. Potentially. What you have to remember is that we have some designs that just simply require better protection. And what I mean by better protection is the X-29 is a good example of this. The X-29 was an extremely unstable aircraft that was capable of doing insane things. The problem is how we had braced the life support system in the X-29. So if we can figure out the life support component, we might be able to figure out how to make an aircraft more agile and more capable with a human pilot. There's been discussion and conflict now for a number of years about pilot versus human, or pilot versus human, unmanned UCAV versus human. And I think that you're always going to have a human component. You're always going to have that component in there. So I think that human pilots, we are going to emphasize into that life support system. Sustain the maneuver. It seems unlikely we can improve the life support enough to the point where pilots can sustain the maneuvers, though. Maybe. And that's literally all I can say about that is maybe. I've looked at plenty of papers over the years, plenty of documents, engineering reports, engineering studies. I've looked at that over a number of years, and when you look at the advancements from point A to point B, it doesn't seem practical that we made that leap. So it might surprise us. I'm not saying that we do or that we will, but it might surprise us. And disagree with we'll always need a human? Okay. I am of the opinion that that there are certain judgments that come with experience that a UCAV is not going to be capable of making. So you'll see them being more utilized. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you'll definitely see more UCAV being more utilized, but human intervention in those, like UCAV right now isn't actually UCAV. All UCAV means is that there is not a pilot in the aircraft. So there's that for starters. But in addition to that, there's always going to be an issue of latency. There's always going to be an issue with potential jamming. There's always going to be an issue with potential override. There's always going to be that potential, and you reduce that potential the less distance between the human interface and the control surface. The more you reduce the distance between the control surface and the human interface, the less risk of interception or corruption or anything like that. And I think defense is smart enough to understand that. So that's why I would say that it is highly more likely that you'll see an increase in things like swarm. and slave rather than fully unmanned or even remote UCAV. It's a very difficult concept. Uh, but again, yeah, exactly. Only time will tell. Yep, 100% agree. Because there's no way of us knowing. That's also above my pay grade. So other stuff, you guys. I do and I don't. I'm torn. I'm torn on what I think of remote. I really am. The problem we have this right now too with and we talk about it an awful lot. The problem with RFID and everything like that. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what I think of this. Um, but no, I totally get where you're coming from. So good stuff though, guys. Good stuff though. Um, let's see here. Drone pilot RAF. Nice. Fantastic. I I've piloted a drone once, and it's an experience. it'll what it'll be kind of like this. I think this is how I see it going down. It's going to be like this whole program was. We're going to be just like, oh well, this is unmanned, so this has to be unmanned. Well, that's unmanned, and then this needs to be unmanned. Well, why don't we figure out something else? Um, I think eventually someone is going to think of something different. Um, and I'm not saying that they're going to go away from, totally go away from the idea because they did not do that with the ATF either. They didn't totally go away from speed, but I think um, it's going to be something that either is in someone's mind and they're saying no, not can't possibly do it, or it's something that we're kind of making fun of right now. It's got to be something that we're making fun of. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things, I'll just say it, one of the things that comes to mind, I'm not even joking. This is where I would put my money. One of the things that comes to mind is lasers. That's what comes to mind. That they are that's going to be the thing. It's going to be lasers, and it's going to be like um, light refraction stealth. That's going to be what that's what I think. I don't know it for sure. Yeah, laser energy requirements is a bit painful, and yeah, no, it absolutely is. That's why everybody laughs at it right now. But I'm thinking, 30, 40 years down the line, they might it might be that. Yeah, they're gonna have to get that taken care of first. I'm waiting for the first solar powered laser energy. That won't happen. I don't think that'll ever happen. Solar powered laser weapon system. Yeah, just look at the hybrids. All I'm saying is we could solve a lot of problems if we just went back to nuclear power. Nobody likes it when I say that. I fully stand behind that statement, but nobody likes it when I say that. Nuclear on a plane is a bit weird. No, not well. So we tried it. This is almost another history topic in all of itself. So we tried it and it worked and we had a lot of good results with it. We wanted to build it because it worked so well. It was like awesome. Like the pilots were just like, "Yeah, we need to build this." The Air Force is like, "Yeah, we need to build this." Everybody was like, "Yeah, we need to build this." You know who wasn't saying, "Yeah, we need to build this"? Hippies. Not even shitting you. Yes and no, but if we're talking about bombers, which is where the primary issue with fuel efficiency lie, um, it no, not really. We mastered it because the MB-36 program, um, they were capable of housing payload. Oh yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I don't I don't see how you would do it on a fighter. I don't see how you would do it on a fighter at all. Um, just because shielding in of itself, remove the weight. Size of shielding would cause the problem. So, yeah. And yeah, as Zosin says, damn hippies. And there goes my follower count. Hi. You know, I'm really surprised nobody's gotten on this yet. And we are way off topic now. But I'm really surprised nobody's gotten on this yet. Where's our hybrid fighter jets? Where's our hybrid bombers? Where's all of our hybrid or EV freaking. Where's our EV 777s and all of that shit? Exactly. Hybrids be heavy. That is exactly why. That is exactly why. But nobody wants to think about that. Nobody wants to think about that. So, yeah, it is what it is. Well, I'll tell you what, folks. I'm going to jump off here. We have another stream here in about half an hour. We're going to be doing some Genshin, actually, is what we're going to be doing tonight. But we've got another stream here in a half an hour. Those of you who are here for the history stream, I greatly appreciate it. Like I said, part 3 is going to air on 9 July at 6 o'clock. We're going to talk about the B-21 Raider. And we're going to talk about some future prospects for it as well. So we'll be diving in a little bit more than we did tonight. Valkyrie program, like I said, airs on next Monday. So not this coming Monday, but the one after that. And we have another historic affairs in there as well. I'm looking for people to be involved in that. So if you are interested at all in being in one of the historic affairs streams, you want to be on stream, by all means, shoot me a message in Discord. Otherwise, I appreciate you all being here tonight. I'll see you at the next stream or the next history stream, whichever one I catch you at. And until next time, folks, please take care. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and we'll see you next time.